Green McLean. I use he, they pronouns if you're writing love poems about me later. And I am a founder, I'm a husband, I'm a dog dad, I'm a Sagittarius, I'm a passionate middle child, and I am very, very proud to be a queer entrepreneur. I am privileged to run Heart Creative with my husband, Jaron. Both of us have a very specific relationship to voice. I grew up with a significant speech difference. I was born with a high arched palate, which meant that all the bones at the top of my mouth were so high I couldn't really use them to make the most speech sounds. So I spent the first 10, 11 years of my life sort of studying the world through a keyhole. I had a lot to express. I'm a big campy individual. I've always been that way. But the risk of mockery and bullying around me as a young person really kept me in the cave most of the time. And it wasn't until later that I started venturing out and building my self-image and building my confidence. But one of the advantages of that early part of my life is that I developed a fascination and a passion for understanding how people use their voices. While all of my peers on the playground were busy playing capture the flag or hide and seek, I was studying the ways that other boys use their voices, their jaws, their tongues, their cheeks in order to make the speech sounds that they were. Because I'm a bottom-up processor, I was really delegating myself and deputizing myself as the speech therapist that I needed to find a way to use my voice in an empowered way. And that passion really never went away. And so we do this work that is called branding at Heart Creative. But in many ways, the word brand is a disservice because we use the same term to talk about the Nike swoosh as we do to express what an organizational website ought to be. And for Jaron and I, in the work that we do for Heart Creative, we're rebuilding trust for people so that they can start believing that not only they have a story to tell, but that story is worth telling. That's the work we're really focused on, is empowering people to tell their story in their own terms, in their own voices. And it feels in many ways like a love letter to my earlier self. I wish that there'd been people out there when I was learning how to use my voice that really were giving space and the support needed to build that inner sort of self-voice image. And that's what we do for people today. And it feels so much like bigger picture.
So can you share the story behind the co-founding of Creative and what motivated you to grow?
Yeah. So back at the beginning of my creative career, I was just making websites for really anybody that had money. I was like, come get your websites, $5 a pop. And it really was like for like no money. And that was okay. I got practice. I really cut my teeth making communications platforms and brands for people that really needed that space. But I was really oftentimes disengaged because there wasn't a lot of depth to the work I was doing. Sometimes if the client was the right kind of person, they were already oriented towards deeper work, we did get to go there. But I had a hard time doing web design, doing branding, and also finding clients that were willing to go a little bit more authentic, a little bit deeper. And it wasn't until Jaron had finished his studies in executive coaching during pandemic that me and my husband noticed that maybe if we started talking about branding work through the lens of inner alignment and then expressing that alignment outward, we'd get a little bit further. And so even though Hark has been around for over 10 years now as a corporation, since COVID, we really had a specific focus of helping organizations brand authentically and humanly. Because the winds of EDI blew through a lot of organizations and all of a sudden there was accountability to say something real through the lens of brand. And that's exactly where we've been farming for the past 4 years, is finding organizations that are really trying to say something that they don't think is so bullshit.
How did you secure your first clients and what steps did you take to build that?
Securing our first client when Jaron and I started working with Hark in this very specific way of inner authenticity felt kind of complicated for us. We didn't have a website. We didn't really know how to talk about our services. We just knew what our values were and how we believed our work could impact people. And so during pandemic, it was very hard to be a business owner. Not many inquiries coming across our front door in 2021. But because of some work that we'd done in a previous project, a fundraising coordinator tapped us into a project to help St. Andrews Wesley, a church up the hill from our studio, brand themselves toward being an LGBTQ affirming church. Both Jaron and I moved through religious constraint and persecution in our early lives, and so that was a complicated lift for us to even begin having a conversation about collaborating with them. But we really brought our full selves, our full stories, and frankly, our full hesitancy to the table and compassionately explored that with the client group at St. Andrews Wesley. We told them that this felt complicated. We told them that it felt weird in this very specific way. And they said, because of that honesty, because of your sensitivity, we know that you're the right people for this work. You have capacity for complexity, and that's exactly what they needed. And so even though we didn't have a website, we didn't have anything talking about our work in any of these like very professional ways, we just opened up vulnerably and trusted that they'd be able to hear the value that we could bring to the table And they had us propose just sort of out of blank canvas space. We really got to surface the ways that we wanted to be working. And they said yes to all of it. And that began this way that we work in a highly engaged, highly touchy-feely, highly repetitive.
From your experience, what are the top 3 branding challenges small businesses that can use to?
I love this question. There are 3 very common pitfalls that people encounter when they're talking about their own. 1, they don't think they're the right person to be speaking for it. There's this huge feeling of imposter syndrome alive in so many different entrepreneurs' contexts because we live in this age of sort of cultist fetishization of the people at the top of these ladders. We're all really familiar with the first names of the people at the top of corporate America. But for those of us that are operating our small businesses, trying to build something from nothing, that has nothing to do with our experiences of brand. When I say brand and I'm talking about my own business, I mean, the conversations I'm having at the yoga studio about what I do in a way that is trying to build human capacity around my role versus the sort of performative brand line. And so helping people believe that telling an authentic story through their brand is the purpose is the first big movement that we make with entrepreneurs. Another big challenge that a lot of people are having with branding today is that AI has come in as a very supportive brand partner. It's really helping us move from brand strategy or business goals into marketing implementation. That's a really beautiful smoothness that AI has brought into the equation. But oftentimes when we're working with entrepreneurs, the ways that they speak are very important and oftentimes a point of pride. If somebody is a newcomer to Canada and they have an accent, that's an important part of their identity. But when we're using AI to communicate for our businesses through our brands, oftentimes all of that linguistic nuance gets flattened into what feels like performative jargon and corporate doublespeak. And so when you go on LinkedIn, a lot of the content sounds the same because the same robot is right. And so we really help clients move towards a place of loving the sound of their own voice. It is all too common for someone to express, I hate the sound of my own voice. And yet, if you can't describe it and you can't love it, you're not going to be able to prompt that into GPT. And so we help heal people's relationships with their voices so they can use them in more empowered ways in their brands. And I'd say the third biggest challenge for most people with respect to small business branding is the notion that everybody's brand is supposed to be entirely unique. If you're a plumber and you fix people's sinks for every day, your brand should probably just be your name and like maybe a wrench or something playful like that. But you don't need a logo that looks like some cool, trendy brand that's gonna like win all the awards. There's a naturalness to brand that I think has kind of been lost because there's a lot of trend chasing in the brand industry. There's a lot of racing to be the coolest or the most modern or the most, matte black. But really, honestly, there's a lot of complexity and a lot of simplicity that can be arrived at by just saying something simply. Why use 20 words when 2 would do?
And what influences have shaped that?
I love this question. I have honestly changed so much since starting Heart Creative. I started this thing back before my Saturn return. I hadn't dealt with my dad's stuff. I hadn't really figured out how I deserve love and respect in this world. And so really the early part of Heart, the early years, I asked a lot of questions like, hey, new client, what kind of creative do you want me to be? Hey, new client, does my identity make you uncomfortable? Let me downsize that for you so that we can have an easier working relationship. A lot of the time in my early career, I was reshaping myself to make somebody else happy, oftentimes a man who had more power than me. And that's what I thought work was supposed to feel like. That's the water that I grew up swimming in. And those were the conditions that I created for myself in this business. And I had to go through a bit of a third life crisis during pandemic, where I reevaluated what love and respect and collegiality meant to me. I did my own values exercise. I had to learn what I was about in this work rather than just letting the client define where I was going to go. I wanted to get a bigger sense of what my North Star was and what I was marching towards through this work. And as soon as I figured out that my bigger picture purpose is to help people hold themselves and others more gently, all of this work made so much more sense to me. The feeling of a brand being a liberatory exercise is so radical in a lot of people's minds, but I'm a big believer that the best entrepreneurs zig when other people are zagging. And that's exactly how we've built Heart Creative these last 4 years, is around doing work in a lot more authentic, a lot more human ways. And frankly, a lot of our peers in the branding agency space said, don't go there. That's a bad idea. And here we are 4 years later, and we're more profitable and we're having way more fun. And Darren and I are still in love. And I think that there's a lot to say around that. That by going our own way, we can feel authentic wind in our hair. And if we're following the pack, all of that gets blocked.
How do you help clients clarify and communicate their brand stories effectively? Are there any measurable things you try?
When we're approaching helping a client build their brand effectively and authentically, honestly, what we're doing is holding up a really generous mirror, asking them big questions where we ask them to talk about their brand. What's the purpose? Why are you here? What got you here? What was the step along the way? We're listening appreciatively. So we're looking for the strengths in their story when they're expressing it in their own ways. Then we hold up this beautiful mirror and we're like, hey, you just said this thing. And because of the nature of Darren and my work, we've heard a lot of the reasons why people caveat their brands or downplay their brands. We just remove all that noise and we help people hear their stories in the way that they're saying them without all of the doubt-based framing or imposter syndrome sort of lowering their own message. We just help them hold their own expression in beautiful, clear light. And that is how we move through brand. And so at the end of the day, somebody doesn't walk away with some brand strategy that we've authored. We're helping them just define their brand strategy in their own words and removing all the doubt and all the reasons not to say that thing so that they have a clear understanding of what's working and what's connecting them through their brand. And building from there, it comes naturally if they feel like it's actually from inside the house.
Looking back, are there specific resources or types of support you wish you had available to you as a new entrepreneur?
When I think back about the types of resources and support that I needed as an early entrepreneur, frankly, I think one of the biggest stumbling blocks is I didn't know what to ask for. And so, as I shared in my earlier story, I thought that having a challenging time at work was the point. And so when I look back at the earlier stages in being an entrepreneur, other entrepreneurs, the mentors that reached out to me and created some sensitive space were the people that I still look back on and reflect on those experiences as really helping me along the way. Another creative director is Steven Sugestad at Wallop Creative. He had me into his studio at like 3 very important times in my early career, not to talk about my skills, not to talk about my corporate goals, not to talk about my bank account, but instead to talk about my relationship with the work. And every time he was listening to me, he didn't just sit there waiting and tapping his knee, waiting to give me advice and telling me what I didn't know yet. He was really, really clear that when he was listening to me, asking me questions about, hey, Parker, what are you building and why? The answers I was giving were enough. And the answers I was giving, he reflected back at me. And I guess he has some folder somewhere or a very good memory, because each time I went back every couple of years, he followed up on my purpose. He followed up on my values. He followed up on my voice. And for somebody to pay attention to me in those very specific and very loving ways helped me grow capacity to pay attention to myself in just those same ways. And here I am all these years later, and I know exactly my relationship with my voice, my values, my purpose, because he helped me build that capacity of sensitively and compassionately seeing myself as an emerging leader instead of somebody who wasn't there yet.
Which client acquisition strategies, such as referrals, events, or digital marketing, have been the most successful for growing creatives?
Since the beginning of Heart Creative, I've known that the creative world is a referral game. It is so complicated to get people to trust a new creative partner if they're starting from zero. And one of the best things about referral-based strategies is that by the time the other person's sitting across the table from you and they've been connected to you from some third-party person, their starting trust at that conversation is maybe closer to 30-40% because they trust that third-party person. And so instead of starting from zero and trying to get them up this very steep hill of building creative capacity and trust with one another, if we start at 30% to 40%, we have a better time. And so what that's meant for us over the last 10 years of business growth has been really cultivating meaningful referral relationships. And that isn't just putting in client service work, it is also a bit of strategic comms. So one of the things we do at the end of our project that has been really, really effective is instead of just asking our clients for a testimonial in their own words, just like write 500 words and like get back to us with your best GPT stuff, we ask them very specific prompt questions that are aimed at them providing us with marketing material that we can turn around and feed to other clients. So we ask clients at the end of our projects, what advice would you give to an executive director who's thinking about starting a project with Heart? And then they get to write in their own words why somebody else should trust us. And that's good for us to have, right? We end up with that document, we have those words. But the client who wrote that remembers writing. And so when they're at a golf tournament or they're at some fundraiser in a month from now, the thing they're going to remember about Hark is the experience they just finished writing. And so that person is so much readier to give a meaningful referral because we've helped them already synthesize it before they're on the spot, before they're at some golf tournament. They've already figured out what value we brought to the table because we asked them that question and we let them answer it on their own with no pressure, with no expectation. Instead, just helping that client give other clients reasons to hire us in their own words.
How do you balance creativity and strategic planning in your projects to ensure both innovation and business development?
I love this question about balancing strategic movement with creative exploration. And I think that the way that you frame that question, Camelia, is for me part of the tension when we're looking at strategic work and creative in a dichotomy, as though there's some spectrum between those two things. We get tripped up. And we as humans, our beauty and so many of our facilities come from the ways that our right brain and our left brain are integrated. And so the way that I approach this question, instead of couching creative as some phase and strategic as some phase, I think a lot more about those as perhaps musical notes that we're harmonizing throughout the entire project. So instead of it being, this pitch's turn and then we move into this thing, it's like those two frequencies can be singing together through a project. And in fact, if they are, we have a better shot at finding solutions that really do accomplish that unicorn scenario of getting high quality creative laddered up and married to strategic objective. And if we're not thinking that those things can be possible at the same time through the entire process, we're never going to arrive at that outcome. And so it's a very important notion that I bring into client contexts each and every time to alleviate the pressure to choose when and how to be creative, and instead honor that we as humans have been creative since the beginning of time, and we always will be. If any fear-based literature or LinkedIn content or whatever out there is telling you that AI is going to replace our capacity to marry creative with strategy, I would say to those same people, that's exactly how we got to this point in human history. And that capacity to marry these two frequencies together is what we're all about and where we're going.
So you've worked in operations and marketing for years. What do you see as the most critical skill for someone running a small service business?
I think that from my perspective, the most important skill for a small business owner to have with respect to their operations and marketing is like the ability to get out of their own way. I think that one of the hardest things about being a small business owner is second guessing each and every decision and then circling back on those decisions and then getting a little bit further with this thing over here and being like, wait, did I make the right decision yesterday? And I think that doing anything in a vacuum is complicated as a human, but doing small business is even harder. And so I really applaud small business owners that are looking to build their facility and capacity in that space in community with one another. Organizations like Novantum that are able to create cohorts for people to grow these skills in safe space with a lot of support and a lot of care, I think are going in the right direction because we were never evolved to do any of this in a way that is competing with one another. Thousands and thousands of years ago, if we were going to hunt a mastodon today, we would find the people to do that thing effectively. We would do the thing, we would hug maybe, and then the next day we'd find a different team to do the next thing. And I think having that space to gather with people for right now, for this thing that we're working on right now, is a really important skill to grow. But unfortunately, within the spaces of ego and the kind of ways that big business are talked about in North America, it's complicated to think about doing a business that isn't going to be your forever plan. It is hard to find a business that is going to be the one that helps you grow. And I think that's exactly why Novantum is really, really valuable, is that it gives people permission to do the skill growing part without having to mask all of that work behind ego.
In your experience, why do so many new entrepreneurs fail to build stable?
I think one of the biggest reasons, if not the reason, that entrepreneurs don't build stable businesses for themselves is that they're not centering pleasure. Adrienne Marie Brown in The Politics of Pleasure talks about how there's no way to repress pleasure and expect liberation, joy, or satisfaction. And I think as a business owner, oftentimes we're shortchanging ourselves with respect to how we're building the equation of our businesses. We're like, oh yeah, our stakeholders are going to be really happy and our customers are going to be thrilled and our funders are going to get blah, blah, blah. But at the end of the day, who out there is solving for personal alignment with the business, or thinking about how much sleep they want to get each night in 3 years from now, or thinking about how this business is going to bring new friends and contacts into their lives that they can connect with authentically? If those questions aren't being asked at the beginning of an entrepreneur's journey, they're going to build a business that eats away at their soul and ends up eroding them. You have to be thinking in terms of where your pleasure is 5 years from now if you still want to be running this business at that time. And if you're not, that's okay. There are other reasons to be building businesses that aren't about pleasure or long-term fulfillment. But if what you're trying to solve for is that longevity, you've got to find a way to acknowledge and center your humanness and what you actually emotionally and sensitively need from the role of being a business owner.
What's the difference between operations and marketing in a textbook? Applying it to a really
I think the biggest difference between learning marketing and operations from a textbook versus doing it on the job as within the context of a Novantum scenario is, frankly, variables. When any business owner is doing anything in their business, there are so many threads of change that they are weaving with. There's the outside context, there's the news stories today, there's whatever's happening in the sector, there's this upcoming election, whatever. There's all of these ways that the world around us as business people is in flux, and like quite rightly so. That's the point of life. Everything has changed. And yet when we're talking about a textbook, we're talking about a fixed scenario. And nothing could be more unrealistic in any sense of the word than a fixed scenario in business. That is just not the case. And the more emerging entrepreneurs are able to think about setting goals within changing tides, the more set up they're going to be for a future scenario where their business can really weather any storm. And that's exactly why Novantum's approach of putting students in real world scenarios where they're actually building based on what the market is doing and based on where any of these service industries are in terms of competition and other people in the space. That's exactly what students should be learning, is how to model and continue honoring that bigger picture purpose, whatever their why is, in the context of all these other businesses' whys.
You've worked in fast-paced business environments. How does Novantum's team-based approach reflect what happens in the real world?
I really appreciate this question because in our culture, fast-paced is often held as this badge of honor. Wow, we're such a fast-paced environment. Wow, we got so much done this quarter. Wow, we fulfilled so many KPIs. But at the end of the day, the human experience is oftentimes very different from that measured, indexed, metrical evaluation of how business is going. And so for an organization to actually move at the speed of human alignment and the speed of trust and the speed of consensus and the speed of imagination, like all of these very human processes that go into building and shaping a business ought to have the time given to them that they deserve. We didn't really evolve to do creative work fast. We evolved to have a sense for how the situation around us is impacting the people that we care about, and then to slowly and creatively build a solution that hasn't been seen before. That's what we're really good at as a species. But in business, we oftentimes believe we drink the Kool-Aid from corporate North America, that doing it fast and doing it completely unique and doing it in a way that is completely protectable is the point. But all of those are weird attachments to getting to the start line first. But if we're not worried about an IPO, you're not like going public or whatever, you're building a service-based company, going fast doesn't really matter. Going constructively and going generatively and going creatively and going together, that's where the good stuff is.
And why do you think stable service-based businesses are such a smart starting point for entrepreneurs today?
I think that stable service-based businesses are a good choice for entrepreneurs because they are working within a space of compassion. If you're a service-based organization or a business, you are building your services based on a request or based on a need that you're noticing out there in the world. And we're really adapted to offer creative gifts. If you can imagine making your best friend's favorite meal for their birthday, it feels good. not because they asked for spaghetti and meatballs, but because you know that that's what they like. And so by making that generous offer and by putting a little bit of attention to fulfilling their unspoken needs, you're crossing a bridge that has meaning to it. And that same scenario can exist in your business. If you're building a cleaning company that is for single parents with like multiple dogs or whatever, like the more niche and the more compassionate, the more specific and the more particular the request is or the need is that you're fulfilling, the more appreciative that person is going to be, and the more you'll feel encouraged and enthused to keep going with this business. If there's a meaningful emotional payoff because you've noticed a need and you're fulfilling it in a creative way, that's going to be the gas in your engine that you need as a business owner to keep going. So if anybody's interested in learning more about the way that we think about story and meaning and personhood and brand, even if you're not even sure what questions you're asking, but you just need some space to talk about it, reach out to us. Our website is harkcreative.com. We're on all social. You can find us there. And on LinkedIn, you can find me at Parker Keating.